theme park video games, a topic that I covered in my Disney Parks Games video a few months back. I thought that I covered most of the games in this little subgenre here, but after receiving some comments on that video, as well as doing some of my own research, I figured out that I barely scratched the surface on theme park video games. So today, I wanted to cover some more of the video games I found that are based on the Disney parks as well as their competitors. And trust me, just like last time, some of these games are surprisingly good, and some aren't that. So first up, we have a sort of follow-up to one of the games that I talked about in the last parks video. One of the games I talked about was Mickey no Tokyo Disneyland Daibuken, which was a Japanese exclusive Super Famicom game. But it turns out that this game also had a version of it released on the Game Boy called Tokyo Disneyland Mickey no Cinderella Shiro Mystery Tour. It's a big title. This game plays fairly similarly to how the Super Famicom game played, except it has been simplified a little bit. Instead of having a button for both the water and air balloons, they are now combined into one button, and it chooses which one to use based on the direction you're pressing the D-pad. In my opinion, this is actually kind of an improvement, since instead of having a bunch of different moves I didn't know I could do, I now have a few moves that I have time to get used to and use in more interesting ways. The game's platforming and enemy placement also just feel a lot more fair than the other game. In that game, things were just constantly being thrown at you with very minimal opportunities to heal, while in this game, enemies are put in more reasonable positions and drop items that restore your health very often. This game also has shops where you can buy items, and you can even find upgrades for equipment and stuff, which all feel like things that should be in the home console game and not the smaller budget Game Boy title. Gameplay-wise, I think that this game is better than the Super Famicom one in almost every way. I actually beat this game unlike the other one, but I think its level theming is much less interesting. Disneyland Daibuken had a lot of problems, but it really did feel like a game based on the parks, while Mystery Tour just feels like you're in a generic video game castle. This is ultimately because this game is fully based on one attraction, which was called the Cinderella Castle Mystery Tour, which used to operate in Tokyo Disneyland. It was basically just a tour through the dungeons of Cinderella Castle where you would see some of the villains from well-known Disney movies and stuff. I actually think this is a cool attraction to base a game off of, but I think the visuals of the Game Boy just don't really do it justice. I often felt like I was just in some random dungeon rather than that specific attraction. Overall, I think this was a really solid game, but it just didn't really feel that much like a parks game. But you see, we're not quite done with the Tokyo Disney parks, as there is also a game based off of Tokyo DisneySea. This game is pretty predictably called Adventure of Tokyo DisneySea, and aims less to be a way to experience the park virtually, and more of a standalone game that happens to be based off of the park. Now, from what I've heard, Tokyo DisneySea is supposed to be one of the best Disney parks out there, and I would really like to go someday, but I probably won't anytime soon since there's a whole Pacific Ocean in the way. But maybe this game could give me an experience that encapsulates the feel of that park while also being a fun video game. Yeah, so it didn't really do either of those things. The first thing that caught me off guard was that instead of the game starting off in the park it's named after, we start in this section based on The Little Mermaid. I didn't really know why the game did this until I figured out this part of the game was based on a section of the park called Mermaid Lagoon, which is based off of The Little Mermaid, so okay, that actually kind of makes sense. So after I finally started playing the game, I found out a very disturbing truth. This game isn't very fun. You really can't do all that much besides just walk around and jump. You can attack enemies, but you do that by picking up other enemies, and it just feels really clunky, and I don't like it that much. The simple gameplay would be fine if there was some interesting stuff for me to jump around on or look at, but instead the game is just you walking back and forth to different places hoping to progress the story. The game is really just walking one place to read dialogue, and then walking to another place to read dialogue, and then walking back to the place that you walked there from so you can then read more dialogue. This was made worse by the fact that I had no clue what the characters were even saying, which isn't really the game's fault at all, but I'm going to blame it anyway because I'm mean. I forgot to mention that, this is also a Japanese exclusive, which is why I couldn't read any of the dialogue. I kind of forgot to mention that. Zowie. I did use the Google Translate app to try and read what some of the characters were saying when I got stuck, and let's just say I got a few gems. The walking back and forth wouldn't be so bad if I just wasn't doing so much of it with nothing else in between. Like, the game has combat it could use to spice things up a little. It's not very good, but it has it. I had like 3 enemy encounters before I got to the first boss, and it took me well over an hour to get to that boss. Also, I almost forgot to mention that Ariel just straight up kisses the main character of the game on the lips, which wouldn't be that weird if the main character wasn't like 11. I mean, imagine you take your kid to Disneyland and Sleeping Beauty gives them a big ol' smooch. I don't think that would be okay. After Mermaid Lagoon, we make our way to Port Discovery, where we sort of just end up doing the same thing. Yeah, I think I'm done with this game. I played this game for probably over 2 hours, and I just didn't find that much to enjoy about it. There weren't any parts of this game I really found all that fun, and while it was cool to see locations based on the park, it really wasn't worth it to me when the gameplay consisted of me just walking back and forth between NPCs. It really sucks because I think a game based on this park could be super cool, but I just don't think this game does a very good job. Okay, so when I was first planning this video, I was not planning on spending so much time on Tokyo Disney games, but they just made a lot of them. I'm even leaving one out because it's just like a minigame collection or something. I don't know, it doesn't look that interesting. But the final Tokyo Disney game we have today is the Game Boy Advance version of Adventure of Tokyo DisneySea. I'll be honest, the PS2 version was pretty disappointing to me. I just couldn't really get into it. But maybe this version might offer a more enjoyable experience that does a better job of representing the park. So this game is a 2D side-scroller with a little bit of platforming mixed in there. I wouldn't really call this game a full platformer because some parts don't really have any platforming and instead just have you doing some minigame. I didn't play this game for very long, but from what I did play, the minigames were all pretty fun and none of them got too frustrating. At the beginning of the game, it had me playing this card game and I just couldn't figure out how it worked at all, and I was really confused until I realized that it was just rock, paper, scissors, which made me feel a little stupid. One thing that I really like about this game is that unlike the last one, we have full access to every part of the park from the beginning of the game instead of just moving from land to land in a linear order. I think being able to explore the lands how you want just helps us feel more authentic to the actual park experience. Now, the one problem with this being open-ended is that I wasn't really super sure what I was supposed to be doing, which wasn't helped by the fact that I couldn't understand any of the dialogue. Overall, I enjoyed this game more than the PS2 version, but I also didn't play it for nearly as long, so whether it's actually a good game or not, I have no clue. Finally, moving on from Disney Park games, we have Legoland for the PC. Now let me tell you, this game is for old PCs, which I do not own, so getting this thing to run on my Windows 10 machine in 2024 was a little bit of an experience of its own, but I got it working and hey, I'm proud of myself. Now I can play this game for an hour and then never touch it again. So unlike the last few games where we had platformers or adventure games, this game is actually a park building game which fits really well with the LEGO brand and is just a fun type of game in general. So this game is in a sort of mission-based structure where you're given a park and have to meet a certain amount of goals before you can move on. I played through all of the tutorial missions and then one of the main missions, which ended up taking me longer than I thought. The missions are pretty beefy since you're pretty much starting from scratch and having to build from there. I kind of thought that since this was all themed around LEGO and probably aimed at kids, it would be super basic and not allow for a very in-depth experience, but I ended up being pretty wrong, as after you get past the tutorials, the game pretty much lets you handle the missions however you want. It's definitely simpler than most games of this genre, and it can be pretty easy since money is almost never a problem in this game, but despite those complaints, I think this game still offers a pretty good park building experience. The game even had these fun little cutscenes introducing how you got certain rides and stuff like that. The only weird thing about these cutscenes to me is that all of the LEGO people have noses, which they don't usually have, and now I think I know why. It just looks weird, and trust me, I know what a LEGO face should look like. I have to stare at one for a long time to make these thumbnails. Overall, this is definitely one of the better theme park games I have played. I would even go as far to say that it's actually good. Before this game, I hadn't really played many of these park simulators, but I enjoyed this enough that I decided to pick up Planet Coaster, and now I have a new addiction. Sorry guys, next video's delayed, I gotta finish Brodgi Land. I did see that SeaWorld also had some games like these back in the day, but I had enough trouble getting one old PC game to work, so I just decided to skip out on that one. But to make up for that, there is one other SeaWorld game I found. This one's interesting. So SeaWorld Shamu's Adventure was a game released on the GameCube, PS2, Xbox, blah blah blah, where you play as none other than Shamu the Orca. You know, it's SeaWorld's classic mascot that died of a uterine infection and blood poisoning at 9 years old way before this game ever came out. Yeah, I find it very strange that SeaWorld's mascot is a dead orca that probably would have been alive much longer if it wasn't at SeaWorld. But onto the game itself. Wait, actually, give me a second. The tutorials are still going. I'm gonna need at least like 10 more minutes. Yeah, so this game starts out strong with a very long tutorial where a manatee sits and explains every single mechanic of the game to you without showing you what they are talking about, so you really don't learn anything until the final part of the tutorial where the game just lets you play it. But once the game actually starts, it turns into a 2D side-scroller type game. Not really a platformer, since you can just swim around and stuff. The game also has sections where you're either running towards or away from something, but all you really do in these sections is just move a little bit to avoid obstacles, and in some of these it literally tells you exactly where to go, so it's not really all that interesting. The 2D sections are definitely the best part of the game to me, and aren't awful, but not really all that fun either. You basically just swim around, collect collectibles, and kill all of the other sea life living at SeaWorld. The game's story is also just wild. Like, it starts out with the Kraken breaking into Shamu's little enclosure, and then we learn that Poseidon, who is described as evil by our little manatee friend, is leading attacks onto SeaWorld. Look, I don't know a whole lot about Greek mythology, but I'm pretty sure Poseidon likes the ocean, so if he's leading attacks onto SeaWorld, I think that's a good sign they're doing something wrong. I don't got a whole lot to say about this one because it's not the worst thing I've ever played, but it's also not good. I'd say it's about at the same level of the Haunted Mansion game, just a bunch of boring fluff. We've spent a lot of time talking about Disney games or some of the games based on smaller parks like Legoland and SeaWorld, but we've left out one major theme park competitor, Universal Studios. Now, the main reason for that is that they don't really have that many games based on their parks. In all of my searching and looking through some of the suggestions I got in my comments of the last video, the only game I could find was Universal Studios Theme Park Adventure. This game was released on the GameCube and uses the same concept that games like Adventures in Magic Kingdom and Disneyland Adventures did, where you have fully explorable parks, but all of the rides are replaced with mini-games. I'll be real, I've heard nothing but awful things about this game, and the opening cutscene isn't helping it at all. Like, come on, what is that? You can't even use hardware limitations as an excuse here. I know the GameCube can do better than that. Once you start the game, you meet Woody Woodpecker, who just sounds like a normal guy whose voice has been pitched up.
Welcome to Universal Studios. I'm Woody Woodpecker.
He tells you that you need to go around and collect all of the stamps around the park by riding rides and finding the universal letters that are hidden around the park. So the first thing that I did was go to the E.T. ride, which basically just consists of you riding a bike and falling a lot. But after this, I tried to go to some of the other attractions, and every single one of them said that there were too many people and I couldn't go in. While I was trying to figure that out, I found Girl Woody Woodpecker, who then gave me one of the hardest quizzes I've ever taken in my life. It's all a bunch of movie trivia, and a lot of it is really obscure, and then when you fail the quiz, you have to retake it, except it now has a completely new set of questions. I was stumped on this quiz for a while, but eventually I just resorted to looking up the answers, and that's when I found out that there are over 700 questions this quiz could pull from. I genuinely don't understand why they did this. Like, no kid is going to know all of this crap, and they're probably not going to want to go to Universal after playing this game because they think they're going to get asked a bunch of trivia about movies they haven't seen. But after I got past that part, I decided to explore the park more to try and figure out how to unlock rides, and that's when I realized just how confusing the map of this game is. It's based on Universal Studios Japan, but the problem with it is just how it's all laid out. It's not a full 3D recreation of the park like Disneyland Adventures, but is instead a bunch of 2D images that are sort of just thrown together without any real thought. It's very confusing to tell which parts of the area you are in lead to the next area and which parts are just dead ends. And then when you find the section that leads to the next area, it takes you somewhere completely different than where it looked like it was going to take you. And sometimes it just completely turns you around. Like, I enter this area from the right and now I'm going left, which just makes everything very disorienting. Eventually, I figured out how to get to the other rides, but I kind of wish that I didn't. All of these minigames are just so miserable to play through and last way longer than they need to. This is especially apparent in the Jurassic Park game, which is so long and so miserable to play through. I genuinely don't think this game really has any positives. It couldn't even reach the status of funny bad. It's just bad. I'm not playing this anymore. Okay, so I was pretty negative about that last game, and I don't want to end the video on such a low note, so I thought I would take this final section of the video as a chance to look at some of the recreations of the Disney and Universal parks inside of Minecraft, which a lot of you really wanted me to do. The first thing we have here are two maps available for you to buy for the Bedrock version of the game. One of the maps is a recreation of Magic Kingdom from Disney World, and the other is a Universal park which from what I can tell isn't really based on any specific park, and instead is an original layout that uses a lot of well-known Universal rides from around the world. The Magic Kingdom map looks very nice and is extremely faithful with its recreation of the rides. My main complaint is that all of the roller coasters move the same as the minecarts do in the normal game, which is fine on paper, but the problem is that when you're moving at an angle, the carts are constantly being yanked back and forth, which make it hard to watch sometimes. Overall, this is a very well-made recreation of the park, but the only problem is that outside of riding the rides and looking for the different characters, there isn't a whole lot to do. This wouldn't usually be a problem since it's just a Minecraft map and not a full game, but I paid money for this and it's kind of expensive for the amount of content you're getting here. It's definitely good and the team who made it obviously cared, but it's just a little too pricey in my opinion. But we still have the Universal map to look at, which like I said earlier is a completely new park layout that is based on existing Universal parks. Overall, I think this map is a little bit better than the Magic Kingdom map. A lot of the rides are very impressive looking and have more going on, and there's a little more to do besides just exploring the park for the sake of it. Funnily enough, I think they actually took some inspiration from the Universal game, and it surprisingly works pretty well. Overall, this one is definitely more worth it to me than the Magic Kingdom map, but it's also more expensive, and I honestly think both of these maps are overpriced. So I mean, yeah, get them if you're really curious and have money to waste, because they are well made, but I just don't think the amount of stuff you have to do justifies the price. But let's say you don't want to pay money yet still want a Minecraft recreation of the parks. Well, there actually is an alternative. On the Java version of the game, there are two servers available for free that offer way more than both of the maps on Bedrock do. We have Imagine Fun, which is just a recreation of the two Disneyland parks, and then MC Parks, which offers recreations of both Disneyland parks, both Universal Orlando parks, many of the international Disney parks, and then all of the Disney World parks, including things outside of the park like the monorail and the hotels. Both of these servers are very impressive, but MC Parks just has so much stuff that it's ultimately the one I recommend the most. So I think that's finally all of the theme park games I want to talk about. I'm sure I'll get more suggestions in the comments, but for the most part, I think I'm kind of done with this topic. I'll probably cover the Epic Mickey remake whenever that comes out because I'm very excited for that, but other than that game, I think I've said my piece on this topic. I will say that making these two videos has made me realize that I do really enjoy talking about theme parks on this channel, which is something that I used to do but just haven't done in a while. So hey, maybe someday soon I'll return to that. But for now, all I know is that they really messed up that Universal game. Like, why does the T-Rex look like that? Ew!